Welcome back. You're watching Political Exchange. My guest, Professor Stephen Friedman from the University of Johannesburg, Center for the Study of Democracy, and of course Vukani Mde from Africa Practice. Before the break, Vukani, you were arguing that the political resolutions taken at Cosatu's conference at the time that Willem Adisha was ousted forced the leadership to get rid of him because he was literally taking a different political course. I've had a look at some of the submissions into the second, or rather the first probe into Zwelinzima Vavi's alleged wrongdoing, and it relates to political actions, or rather what they believe were arguments that made it very clear that there was what they called a rupture between Zwelinzima Vavi and Cosatu at a political level. It related particularly to the way in which the ANC's Mangaung conference was handled. If my memory serves me, the resolution at conference was that they would support the top three, which means Zuma, the then Deputy President of the ANC, Kgalema Motlanthe, and the Secretary of the ANC, as well, Gwademantash. Many people argue that that Vavi's attack on Gwede at the conference after the top six was elected when Kgalema didn't make it was a very clear indication that he had in fact not supported the resolution and was unhappy with the fact that Kgalema received so very little endorsement, and that was in fact closetly not supportive of the view that suggests that indicated that Zuma comes back for a second term.
The critical difference there is that is their interpretation of Vavi's actions and motives. There is no evidence of Vavi publicly going against a standing Cosatu resolution. Cosatu resolved in 2000 at the last conference in 2012, I think, to support the retention of the ANC, particularly the top three, as you've said. And that is what they went to the ANC conference with Vavi signing off on that. So in a sense, Vavi did not publicly, very, very differently to the Madisha president, Vavi did not publicly come out before the ANC conference against the Cosatu resolution.
I want to shift gear a little bit, gentlemen. We've talked a lot about Cosatu being this incredibly important voice against corruption in society, and has come forward and really, put the spotlight on wrongdoing, particularly within the state and also in the private sector. They've been very, loud on corporate collusion and, of course, speaking out against corruption in the ruling party. But the truth of the matter is there's a lot of corruption within the union movement itself. Zwelinzima Vavi stands accused of it in the sale of the buildings. If you look at some of the investment companies in some of the affiliates of Cosatu, you see the same allegations being made. Stephen, is Cosatu looking, or rather the question that people ask is, can people in glass houses really throw stones?
Well, whether they can or not, I mean...
Or ought they to?
Well, I think that the problem the question we really need to be dealing with is this. I mean, whether people like it or not, Cosatu has played a crucial role in defending and building democracy in this country, particularly since we became a democracy. I mean, it was before, but in the sense that it has spoken out for its members, it has held government to account on treatment for people living with HIV/AIDS, on issues of corruption, on issues of inequality, etc.
On foreign policy.
And on foreign policy. And I think that what you say about Cosatu is entirely true, but if we're now going to get it, we're now facing a situation where, in a sense, the organization which was the watchdog is now subject to the same ills as the organization that is acting as a watchdog. Only that is very serious, not only for working people in this country, but for the country itself. Because it raises the alarming possibility that the effects of the inequalities, the effects of the poverty, etc., are so great that we're not developing organizations and institutions which can get beyond that. And then I think it's something the whole country needs. So there's a great deal at stake here. It's not just the ANC's election prospects. It's discovering that an organization which played a crucial role in making sure that the voices of working people were heard is now subject to the same ills as the organization which was criticizing.
Vukani, when we were political journalists, we often argued that one of the reasons why the ANC is able to re-energize itself and reinvent itself was because of this active, progressive influence of its left allies, which distinguished it from, let's say, liberation movements like ZANU-PF, even the MPLA for that matter, and Frelimo in Mozambique. Here you have a situation where both organizations, ruling party and the labor movement, engulfed in similar problems, eating the organization up from the inside. Cosatu, for example, was incredibly central to setting up Corruption Watch, which was a good thing, hailed as a very credible move. Zwelinzima Vavi had to be removed from the board of Corruption Watch off the back of these scandals. The implications, in your view, Vukani, for the fight against corruption, but also for the fight against, you know, a bureaucratization of the project to build and deepen democracy?
To give a simple answer to the earlier question you posed to Stephen around this, yes, Cosatu does face a credibility gap when it comes to its own role in advancing the fight against corruption. And that is broader than Vavi, quite frankly. Whether the allegations against Vavi are proved or not, he finds himself on a sticky wicket. He is in a position in which he should not have the allegations that Cosatu is currently investigating against him. Within, if you dig deeper and go into the affiliates, the General Secretary of Satao is currently facing criminal charges over the disappearance of 18 million rands of workers' investment funds.
Right.
And there are similar stories in
Kopano
and the other.
Kopano Kimatla, Cosatu's investment vehicle, had its license revoked to be able to manage, you know, financial services
because it was unable to act in a fiduciary.
The company had not sat for over a year.
Board, yeah.
Vavi, as the Secretary General, oversees that process. Colin, the head of Kopano, reports directly to the Secretary General. And then, of course, much in Cosatu is made of collective leadership. So it's not just Vavi, but that entire leadership, Stephen. Many people in this factional battle have tried to say that they're pro-Vavi or pro-Stumut Dlamini. Isn't it the case that all of them are culpable?
Well, I don't know about all of them, but quite a lot of them. And the question you're asking is, does this affect the credibility of the fight against corruption? Well, in a sense, no, in the sense that I'm absolutely convinced, and every bit of evidence we suggest. I mean, if you polled the general membership of Cosatu, I mean, the percentage of people in Cosatu who are angry about corruption is probably about 85%. Yeah. And if you go out to grassroots members of the ANC, it's about the same. And in a sense, perhaps what we're looking at here, you know, it may get worse before it gets better, and things may have to sort themselves out. But in a sense, a gap is being created in our politics, I think. I think there is now a tremendous gap for somebody to come along, maybe from within the union movement, maybe from within the ANC, and provide an alternative for those people. Because in a sense, what has happened now, what you're implying and you know, what we're saying is that the alternative used to be Cosatu, that alternative is in trouble at the moment. But something else will emerge, because I think that the popular groundswell is there. And the advantage we have over those other countries you mentioned is that, for better or for worse, we have a much larger organized workforce which is not dependent on the government for their jobs. And I think that that's potential strength, but it may get very messy before that emerges.
We're in a country where the state is certainly one of the biggest employers of people, and in states that are highly unequal, it's not an unusual phenomena. We've seen the impact of that in the change in membership in Cosatu as the manufacturing base of the country shrinks. We see the service sector becoming dominant, and you see that in Cosatu. How does what is happening in Cosatu affect the kind of long-term viability of this political alliance between itself, the African National Congress, and the South African Communist Party? Are we going to see this alliance going forward for the next decade, for the next 2 decades, or is it going to face a rupture without it being formally announced? It will just kind of shed bits, you know, as we go along.
I think we're already seeing the beginnings of that rupture, that the political and ideological loosening of the ties, not neatly between Cosatu and the ANC on the one hand.
It's across the structures.
It's across all of these three organizations. So what you're going to see is not a split, but rather an implosion from within, in which various people and various factions pull in different directions to the point where the structure eventually collapses under the weight of those contradictions. How long that process is going to take, we can only guess it, but I am very certain about the fact that it's already begun.
Stephen, many people have spoken about the death of the alliance. Many analysts have tried to predict it, and of course it perpetuates itself. But what are the implications of an alliance that has essentially been able to construct a social compact that has profound effects on the cohesion of a society post-1994? What are the implications of this alliance imploding? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing?
Well, I don't think, I mean, to follow on from what Vukani is saying, he's not saying that the alliance is going to implode in the sense that Cosatu is going to split off or the SSP is going to split off. He's talking about the whole structure imploding. I'm not sure that it's going to implode. I think that it is, I think it may well split again. I think the implications are very difficult to gauge. I mean, there are obviously very serious risks. That you could have a situation where we land up in some sort of authoritarian system because there's just no democratic centre. On the other hand, you could
yes.
you could go in a democratic direction. And just to look at our neighbours, we spend most of our time looking at Europe, and that's inappropriate. Yes. There are differing models. We know about the Zimbabwean model, but for all the difficulties at the moment, nobody talks about the Zambian model. And the Zambian model is one where you see the writing on the wall, and you call a general election, you accept the result, and you go into opposition. I think either of those are possible. I'm mildly optimistic, and the reason I'm mildly optimistic is that I think we've set a whole lot of precedents here which are going to help us. Even something like the fact that we've had 4 presidents since we became a democracy. I think that the message has got through to a certain extent that you don't hang on to power in those situations. So I'm reasonably optimistic.
Well, gentlemen, there's certainly much more to talk about, but we run out of time. We leave it here. Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Vukani. That's where we leave it for tonight's edition of Political Exchange. Join me again tomorrow night for another edition of the program. I'm Karima Brown. Goodbye.